Hey everybody, so we are here with a pretty short little video this week on the Northern Renaissance. You guys are going to have this and then your third test. So let's go ahead and get into it. So basically the Northern Renaissance is the rest of Europe that's being influenced by the Italian Renaissance. So the majority of like the High Renaissance and all of that occurred in Italy, but the rest of the world is influenced by those artists in great part because many people are flocking to Italy to learn to be artists and then are going back to their country of origin and are applying those skills to their own culture and their own life experiences. And because a lot of the world away from Rome is not as controlled by the Holy Roman Empire or by, basically the Vatican, the further away you get, the less the influence of the church has on the work that's being created. So you end up seeing a lot more things that are more personal, things that don't really have anything to do with religion at all, or are somehow more specific to the area that they were made in. Okay, so a lot of where the Northern Renaissance takes place that we want to talk about, a lot of the important stuff that's going on is like in Germany and in Flanders. Okay, so there's a lot of realism that's happening in Flanders. Jan van Eyck is the main character of that. And so he is one of the first people to use oils outside of Italy. So, and it's even said that he might have used them before his influence in Italy. So just depending on who you listen to art historically. So he may have been, one of the very first people to ever experiment with that and use that as a medium instead of tempera painting. So some of his paintings have some tempera in them, and some of them are strictly oil paintings. But he's very well known for his skill in using oils. So people from the Northern Renaissance, you see this influx of realism and things getting a lot more very naturalistic and looking like a photograph. And the idea of that is that we are, as viewers, looking at a painting as if we are present in that moment and in that space. So artists started thinking about painting as a window to the world. It's like you're looking through a window and seeing a scene at your own eye height, like you're standing there with them. So this is something that sort of starts during the Northern Renaissance. And I'm sorry I didn't have that pulled all the way up there. So looking across Europe, the northern part really maintains a pretty Gothic style. And then the south, because of just location, is still pretty tied to the Byzantine style and that Eastern Roman Empire. So you may notice some of those things, not too heavily with the examples I'm giving you, but just know in general that's kind of the way things got laid out. A lot of, particularly, in Jan van Eyck's paintings and many different Northern European or Northern Renaissance paintings and really painting going forward from this point from all over the world really starts kind of pointing out using this method of having attributes in the painting that stand out, that tell the viewer and communicate with the viewer very specifically who we're looking at, whether they were important or not, what time period it's from. They get very, very specific in their attributes so that there's never a question of the meaning of the work. So that symbolism is there as a sort of visual language to teach the viewer what they're trying to say. So the meaning becomes way more important than anything prior to this point in time, especially because you're getting outside of religious work in great part. And so you need those attributes so that you can identify the people that you're looking at. And so you see a lot of that in Northern Renaissance painting. Okay, let's skip to the next slide. So this is probably the best example of that, and this is Jan van Eyck. This is what we call the Arnolfini portrait, and your book may say the Arnolfini wedding portrait because your book is like 20 years old. But they now call it the Arnolfini portrait because the understanding of that symbolism has shifted a little bit since then, and we're not exactly sure whether it's technically a wedding portrait or not. So there's a lot of different things different attributes that Jan van Eyck is using to communicate with us. And so we want to go through those and look at them. So this is an oil on panel. So he's up north. He's not like the Venetians and using canvas yet. And plus it's early. It's 1434. So it's a little early for that. So this is an oil on panel, and it is a man standing with a woman. They're holding hands. She's gripping her dress up around her waist. She looks to be with child, but the idea is that maybe not necessarily, and we'll get to that in a second. He has his hand raised and is almost like in a pledge to her, and they're holding hands very openly for us to see. And we are standing here with the viewpoint of being present, as though, they're responding to our presence in some way. But if you look and you zoom in on this convex mirror back here on the back, and I've got a little thumbnail of it pulled up here for you, we are not shown in the painting in the reflection of the mirror, but instead that is a portrait of Jan van Eyck. So he is, this is kind of something that the Dutch do. They do this kind of showing off their skills and showing the reflection of a mirror, and having themselves present in that. It's kind of like their own signature. But he does sign his signature up at the top anyway. So he still signs it, and his self-portrait is there as well. So it's kind of like he's serving as a witness to this scene. So you have a bedroom scene. The couple is not really, he's kind of dressed in a merchant's clothing. He's not really in sort of like a tux kind of thing, or the version of it from back then. They have a dog between them. There's house shoes kicked off on the floor over here. So they seem to already be in a sort of domestic situation already. So there's a couple different lines of thought on the meaning of this. And I've listed here on the side some of those attributes and what they mean. So be aware of them, and I'll go through some of them. But it seems as though, and I think they thought it was a wedding portrait. And a lot of times what would happen is a couple would get married. They would have their wedding night. And then sometimes if the groom was kind of a bad guy, he might disappear after that and be like, oh, I didn't marry her. And there's like no proof, right, that they were married. Maybe the witness that they had also was kind of on the side of the groom. And then the woman would be ruined. And so the idea here is that the wedding portrait was a gift to his wife, his new wife, as sort of like a marriage contract. So we were married, we spent the wedding night together, we consummated the marriage, and I'm pledging here my loyalty to my wife. And so this is their first portrait together, and a gift to her to sort of kind of ease her mind about her future and make sure that she feels comfortable in her new life. And that she is holding her dress in such a way that it's symbolic that she is willing to carry his children, and that since they've spent their first wedding night together, she might already be carrying his child, but that she wouldn't be married at this point. That she wouldn't be pregnant at this point. Her head is covered, and only married women had covered heads. So normally if you're a maiden, you have your hair down, but this shows that she's already married. She's wearing green, which is a symbol of spring. It's also a symbol of fertility because the plants grow and come back in the spring. And you might be like, well, why isn't she wearing a white wedding dress? Well, people didn't always wear white wedding dresses. This is something that at some point in time, some, princess or queen or somebody decided to get married in a white dress, and it became kind of the thing to do. But it wasn't always. It was more traditional to wear a green dress representing these symbols that I just told you about, this ability to get and willingness to have children and be fruitful in your marriage. So her stomach being exaggerated like that is just the idea of the potential, childbearing ability there. The dog in between them is another thing that is a very pretty specific Dutch type of staple, and that is a symbol of loyalty. So the dog is loyal to man, and so literally they have between them loyalty. Okay, so the dog is placed right between them as a symbol of their loyalty to one another. In the windowsill, you have some fruit there. Okay, this is fruit that it's tropical. It's not available there. So this shows that he's a man of means, that he can import his groceries and sort of just like leave them on the table there. And also outside in the window, if you zoom in there, you see that there are flowers blooming on this tree. So that's another symbol of spring. Another thing is that there is light shining in through the window onto their faces, showing that, they have the light of God, showing light, lit upon them, that God is, on their side and they have his favor. Their bedroom is drenched in red. So they have love and passion between them. That's what that symbol is. So one thing that starts the kind of controversy over the meaning of this is looking up here at the top. If you look at the candelabra up here, I think you call it that, the chandelier, you have one candle lit and no other candles lit. So what does that mean? Why would he do that? Nothing is left to chance here. Jan van Eyck, every single element meant something. So you have to kind of figure that out. So it could mean that all the candles were burning and they burned all night and now it's the morning and there's just one left. But that doesn't really make sense because they would burn evenly, right? So this is what makes people believe that it means something else. So this is one light is lit and it's over the groom's head, and there's nothing lit over the bride's head. Also, he doesn't look particularly pleased. He looks sort of unhappy, and he's wearing these dark, drab clothing. And so if she's in wedding dress, colors and everything, why is he in his everyday sort of clothes? And so the idea here is that maybe they had been married, the portrait wasn't complete, and she died in childbirth. That's why her light has gone out above her head, because it's a symbol of life. So maybe she has died, and he had this portrait completed that maybe had been started before her death as a wedding gift. It just kind of took a while to get done. And she has actually already died and has passed. It makes it kind of gives it a sad twist. All the other symbols can still mean the same thing. It would just be sort of a shift in understanding why her dress is the shape that it is, the idea of her kind of showing off her bump, that it maybe isn't all that symbolic, that she actually was pregnant, and they were kind of further along in their marriage, and she passed away in childbirth. So a couple of different things. If you look at this little thumbnail here, there's a couple things I missed. One is that this mirror has the stations of the cross here. So this is talking about Jesus's death and resurrection and so on. These beads over here on the side are amber beads, and those are a symbol of motherhood and childhood and fertility. So again, all of these symbols about her ability to produce an heir for him, to have children with him, are present there regardless of the meaning. Okay. All right, move on to the next one. So this is Albert Dürer. He is a German painter. And so he's a guy who believed that the artist was inspired by God, that God moves the artist's hands. And so when they paint or draw or make a print, that God is actually working through them. And so that the role of an artist was somehow the act of God. All right. So he believed in the artist's supreme role as a creator, because God, the creator, is working through him. So this is going to help you understand why he painted his self-portrait at age 29 in the way that he did. I wanted to show you a couple of other things. There's a self-portrait at 13 and there's a self-portrait at 22. If you look at those, the three of them don't look the same. The guy in the middle looks totally different than the ones on the left and right. So his actual appearance was pretty homely. He was pale, he had red hair, and he was kind of a little bit thinner, I think, than the picture in the middle. He kind of looks like a hardy kind of person in the center, and is very different looking in the other images. And those other two images are very similar. But they are very steeped with symbolism because of, the time and place. So here we have Dürer in the middle, and he has a couple of things. He has signed his signature here, which says 1500, and then there's an A and a D. So like the year, Anno Domini, year of our Lord, 1500. So that's when he painted it. But AD is also his initials, Albrecht Dürer. So the year of our Lord also is his name. So that starts this kind of comes across as a little sacrilegious if you don't understand that a lot of people believed that God was guiding his hand. And so here he is facing us, which is, again, a strange thing to have this full-on straight portrait unless you're a king or something. So this is sort of elevating his station by looking at us directly and turning his shoulders towards us and everything. He's also changed his hair color. He's wearing a certain type of fur cloak and is holding his hand in this sort of blessing pose like a priest would do or the Pope would do. So why is that? So why would he do that? And the idea here is that he is emulating Christ and painting himself as Christ. Again, you may think this is kind of sacrilegious, but he put here, in the inscription, it says something like, and it's not an exact translation, but this is Albrecht Dürer painted myself in these colors in the year of our Lord, and such and such. So he explained that basically he was portraying himself as Christ because he believes that Christ works through him in his work. So it's kind of like a celebration of his faith and less I think I'm a god, kind of thing. So you kind of have to take that into understanding when you look at this type of artwork. All right, Peter Bruegel is a Flemish artist. He does what's known as Dutch genre painting. So this guy, he was pretty wealthy, came from a very well-to-do family, and he worked and sold his paintings and made a lot of money doing that to very wealthy patrons. And these are day-to-day people. They're outside of the clergy. They're not part of the church. And so he's able to actually make a good living, selling his work to people who are not the Catholic Church commissioning paintings. So what he liked to do is illustrate the lives of common people, and that's what genre painting is. It's sort of everyday behaviors in a town or in a place, people just going about their day-to-day lives, and it not being anything just spectacular. It just being, this is what life is like. So he did a couple of different series of work, and one of them is this 6-part series on the seasons, and this one here, Hunters in the Snow, obviously represents winter. I think he had it broken down into months, and this one is January. So when he painted, he went and studied Renaissance perspective, and he did that in Italy and came back and brought it into Flanders. And so what he ended up doing was like substituting the landscape. So he used the Italian Alps and brought them in and put them there in this landscape that doesn't really make any sense. And yet the rest of the landscape looks like his home. So it's kind of interesting. It's like it's elevating the landscape in such a way that it is making this more of a Renaissance painting just by the fact that the Alps are in the background. So it's kind of like a weird choice, but it's something that he did. He also used these really high up vantage points and would paint from just like as if he's sitting up in a tree. So it's kind of a weird approach to getting everything in the image that he wanted to get. But it does, get the job done. So since he was an aristocrat and since he was kind of a famous painter, he had to sort of hide in order to get the people to not act like differently because he was there. So if you have your photo taken, if you know somebody's there taking a picture, you're going to act differently in that space. So what he would do is he would dress as a peasant and would go kind of secretly sketch and draw and do things where people couldn't really see him. And then he would go back into the studio and complete that. And people would never know, that they had been the subject of that. So kind of cool. So it's all symbolic. The hunters coming back, they're exhausted. They didn't get very much. People in the background are working really hard trying to prepare what little they have. This was sort of during a time where people were struggling to kind of provide for the communities. Here we have the dogs are just like completely exhausted. The men are kind of trudging back home. And yet it's still this sort of peaceful landscape. It's a little bit sad. I think even the birds look like they're looking for something to eat. So a lot of times it was a criticism on society or what was going on at the time. Children's games is a pretty good one in terms of that idea. So it's a whole city where children are just running rampant all over the place, and that's all there is. It's like a school let out, and they just kind of took over the streets. So basically, he's just saying that all men are behaving like children. Mankind is, not making the most of their lives on earth, or just kind of worrying about the wrong things and being childish. So he's sort of comparing sort of things that are maybe going on in the government in this particular city, or whatever, to, childhood and playing these games. So you see all these kids with all these hula hoops and everything. So it's a critical sort of criticism. But if you notice here, again, we have this really high 1-point Renaissance linear perspective that goes off into this vanishing point down at the end of the street. Everything is aligned there. So you can always go back and figure out, where did he learn this from? Where did this come from? And you can see those ties back into Renaissance art the more you look. This is my favorite of his work. So this is the landscape with Fall of Icarus. So the story of Icarus is that this son of a god or a king, I think it was, I can't remember exactly, but he asks his dad, he says, "Dad, I want to be able to fly. Will you make me wings? This is all I want in the world." So he says, "Yeah, fine, I'll make you these wings, but you have to promise that you're not going to fly too high, too close to the sun." He says, yeah, Dad, whatever, it's fine. Whatever you say, I just want to fly. So Icarus is very arrogant, and he's going to do whatever he wants. And so Dad gives him wings, but he makes them out of wax. So what does Icarus do? He flies directly up too close to the sun, and the wax melts, and he dies. He falls to his death. So it's this great, mythology. It's this old story. So here we have, down here on the bottom right, just beneath the ship, are his little legs kicking in the water. Okay, so this is called Icarus, Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. So it's much less about Icarus and much more about the landscape and everything that's happening around. And there's very little attention actually paid to the legs there. So somebody, this poet or this writer, W.H. Auden, he writes in a poem about this. He talks about this painting and relates it to life. So he says in Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The plowmen have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it was not an important failure. The sun shone as it had on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling from the sky, had somewhere to get to and sailed calmly on. So what he's saying here is like basically this horrible tragedy happened to this person, but the rest of the world doesn't care. People have to go on with their lives, and it's this whole Flemish proverb, no plow stops because a man dies. Okay, so just because this guy fell from the sky, because he was stupid and didn't listen and didn't follow the rules, doesn't mean that they don't have work to do and they have to move on. So an artist writing this or creating this or thinking about this is someone who's going to be worried about, even if I make the greatest painting on earth, I achieve the greatest heights I can, or if I don't do anything of value or worth in my life, it's not going to make a difference to anyone else. So it's kind of this idea of feeling like, nobody cares, what I do, and people are indifferent to me, whether I'm doing well or otherwise. And even if I do great, maybe nobody will even notice and nobody will remember me. Right? So it's kind of a depressing sort of look at things, but it's also really kind of funny that his little legs are kicking over there and nobody's even noticed or paid attention. All right, so looking at the late Renaissance, this is, even Michelangelo was part of the late Renaissance because he lived to be 88, so he sort of lived through several different time periods and art movements. But we're not going to look too much into it. Mostly just the greatest achievements of his late Renaissance work was stuff of kind of rebuilding the Vatican and renovating the Vatican and the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. There's some architectural work that he did there. So we're not going to get really too much into that because this is a survey. And I will sort of mention, I'm sorry that this image is like a copyrighted, it has the watermark on it. You can look in your book and see a better image of it, but it was the only one I could get that was high res enough for this screen. Anyway, so the late Renaissance is occurring mostly in Venice, and this is where you start to see canvas coming in as the leading support for painting. In Venice, it is a port, so lots of merchant ships are coming in and trading there. And so, they're looking around going, what can we do that's better than wood that won't warp in this intense humidity near the water? And they look around and they go, oh, look, canvas on the ships that they're sailing by. What about that? So, eventually they figure out how to make that work. And so they start being like the leaders of doing that. In Venice, they're also making very unique types of paint pigments. So this is kind of a center for the best art supplies in the world at that point. Same thing with the glass that they created there. There's Murano glass that comes from Venice that you can't get from anywhere else in the world. And they're famous for their quality of those types of things. They even had glass and precious metals and things ground up into their pigments so that they would shine more. But this is a really wealthy city. This is a place that is home to a lot of tourism, even at this point in time. But at the same time, it was kind of like New Orleans. It's kind of the only place I can compare it to. Sort of a city that you go to have a good time, a city that you go party at, you go on vacation at. Now, there's plenty of people who live there. My old ex-in-laws, if you will, live over there. And so I've been a whole lot of times. But they mostly live on the mainland. There's not a lot of people who live on the actual island. Venice is an island. So what happens is, it kind of gets a little bit debaucherous over there, okay? Since everything's a party, their artwork sort of reflects that. And so there's a lot of things that will come into that. The people who are looking for paintings for their homes or their summer homes or what have you are looking for things that reflect the life of, the Venetians. So the paintings will be very different for that reason. So being that this is in the middle of the Catholic Inquisition, this is a time where, and Venice is very much controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. They kind of have to be a little bit careful about what they do and say, particularly because the Catholic Inquisition, which is this group of people who were sort of elected by the Catholic Church to look into anything that might be heretical, something that's against the Bible, that is not showing it exactly word for word the way that it's written in the Bible, then it can be something that can be punishable by death. So this is a really serious thing. You can't make a painting that is against what the Bible teaches and what the Catholic Bible teaches. So you could be like burned at the stake or something. You could absolutely be killed for it. So what happens here is that Paolo Veronese, who's a very famous painter at this time and is beloved by Venetians because of his ability to make religious work sort of fit into the Venetian lifestyle, it kind of gets him in trouble. So you can look online and look up the court case where he was taken to court for this painting here, and see how he defended himself. It's word for word. It's, they had I think you call it a stenographer there that actually wrote down what everybody said word for word, so you can read it, and it's really kind of funny and see him defend himself. So basically, he painted this painting, and right now it's called Feast in the House of Levi, but originally it was called The Last Supper. And that's why it was so offensive, because this is not exactly the picture of what the Last Supper, at least, like Da Vinci's painting. So looking at that and looking at this, it's a very different sort of thing. You have Christ surrounded by all types of people, good, bad, and other. It kind of looks like there's a circus happening here all around him. You have drunks basically hanging out. You have courtesans, which is just a really fancy version for prostitutes. You have people who are, and I don't know how they know this, but that are German, who are connected to the Huns. And so, like, if you think of like Attila the Hun, these are sort of people that were considered sort of outsiders that really didn't have any connection to the Bible at all, at least not to this particular story. And also were kind of considered barbaric people that weren't, big air quotes, good enough to be in the presence of Christ. So it was sort of like, it's like you've painted the Last Supper as he's at a bar. It was about the same amount of an insult there. Even the dog that's painted here in the foreground is supposedly supposed to be Mary Magdalene. And that's just kind of another thing that's just like a slap in the face. People picking their teeth. There's little people. There's just all these different types of people that it just kind of show that it's not the right setting. And so when Paolo Veronese was defending himself, he said, well, listen, the Bible says in Luke chapter 5, when they talk about why Christ hung out with sinners, he responded and he said, well, do doctors seek the well? No, they don't. And my goal is to be with sinners and convert them, And so he was like, well, here he is. And he frequently ate and drank and spent time with sinners. And so how is this any different? And he was kind of right. But they didn't like that too much. So anyway, turns out, so as a compromise, he changed the name of the painting to The Feast in the House of Levi, which was kind of more fitting to what we're looking at here. But it's taking the setting of the Last Supper, which is this holy event, and making it into this sort of crazy, wild, drunken party. And now, because of the change in the name, it fits a little bit better. So over here on the side are some details that are a little bit sharper in focus for you guys to look at. So if you notice, here's some of the revelers here. Here's the guy picking his teeth. We have all different races and creeds. We have this little person here who's dressed as a jester. He's apparently carrying a parrot on his in his hand or on his arm. And then down here at the bottom, he actually added Luke chapter 5 to his painting, to that column, and it's down here on the bottom right, just to kind of reiterate what he was trying to explain to the Catholic Inquisition. But it saved his life to change the name of the painting. I think it was a good compromise. So this is the last slide. This is a couple of other artists that are from the late Renaissance, so Tintoretto and Titian. So Titian was, one of the greatest painters of all time, and he taught Tintoretto. And Tintoretto is just the name we know this artist by, not his given birth name. But he was, it means little dyer, because his dad... and he worked with his dad as a fabric colorist. So he started understanding dyes and canvas and things like that. And he understood how to mix color already. And so it wasn't that huge of a step forward to become a painter. And they saw some promise in him. So they sent him to learn with Titian. So Titian painted the Venus of Urbino. Both these images are of courtesans. So courtesans at the time were kind of acceptable members of society. They were the people who were responsible for throwing all these lavish parties and gatherings, and it was just kind of part of life. This wasn't your typical run-of-the-mill, street corner prostitute. This was a woman who was extremely well educated, who was stunningly beautiful, who probably at some point in her life was nobility and maybe had some sort of falling out, maybe her husband died or gambled their money away or something like that, and she was left destitute at no fault of her own, and had to earn a living, and so would basically have a boyfriend or two and throw very lavish parties for those important people, those that she was with. So they ended up also being used as muses for the artists. So somebody like Titian would hire Angela del Moro, who is this courtesan here shown as Venus, to pose for them for their paintings. And so everyone knew who she was. It was a very good likeness. And, she was also meant to symbolize Venus, and it was just a very Venetian thing to do, to have a well-known courtesan as a goddess in a painting. So that one up there at the top is Veronica Franco. She was another famous courtesan. And I don't remember if it was Angela del Moro or Veronica Franco. I think it was Franco. Okay, that's what I wrote on the slide here. But was so accepted by society that she had a noble burial beside her patron, I guess, the man that she was employed by, right? But no matter what, when they're painted, they're shown, they don't give 100% dignity to her. So in Veronica's image, she is sort of haphazardly dressed. It looks like she's putting her clothes back on. She's not fully clothed yet. And a little bit of her chest is peeking out there. So she's a little bit indecent and needs to complete, her process of getting dressed. Angela del Moro, since she's posing as Venus, is completely nude. Right. So this, for the Franco portrait, it's just a portrait of who she was. It's just a portrait of a woman. The other one, the one of Angela del Moro, this Venus of Urbino, she's serving a particular purpose. So this is a painting that was commissioned by the Duke of Urbino. That's why she's the Venus of Urbino. And it was a gift to his new bride. So he was scheduled to marry a 14-year-old girl, and this was normal back then. And so imagine being a 14-year-old girl and you're about to enter into a marriage with a grown man. He's probably in his 30s or something. And you don't know anything about life, right? Or marriage or anything, because you're an innocent, sweet little girl. So he gives her this painting to serve as an example of what he expects a wife to be. And so the Venus is that example. She's a symbol of love, both, emotional love and physical intimacy and love. So she is gazing back at us. She's not shying off. She's looking right into our eyes as the viewer. So it's clear that she is not ashamed of her nudity. She symbolically is holding flowers and petals in one hand. The other hand is supposed to be a symbol of her doing the same thing with the other hand. So it's a little kind of iffy there in terms of comfort level for a lot of students to know about that. But look what she has next to her. So this is, as indecent as that might seem, she's got the puppy at her feet, which sort of balances out that sweetness of, yes, she is this sexual goddess, right? But at the same time, she's loyal, and that puppy is that symbol of that. So this is, happening in Venice, and that sort of Northern European thing is influencing the late Renaissance in Venice as well. So it is sort of a cultural give and take at this point in time after the High Renaissance. In the background, you have her wedding chest being packed. And her attendants are back there getting that ready for her to go to her new home. So while Angela del Moro is the symbol of the Venus, she's also the symbol of the Duke of Urbino's new wife. This is what I expect you to be. You should be all of these things: loyal, beautiful, open to love, and you'll be provided for. So kind of a weird thing to end on there. But it's definitely an incredible painting. She's, it's a very beautiful image. All right, so this is the last slide. So you guys learn all of this stuff. Really pay close attention to the slides. If you can make yourself a bunch of flashcards, that would be really good. You can do that online, or you can just print them out and make your flashcards. Another thing you can do is draw the images. That helps you really cement them into your mind. You definitely won't forget them, but I know you don't have time for that. So anyway, study the slides because there's not a lot of vocabulary, so that means this will be very slide heavy for this test. And I can't say that enough. You need to know the artist's name, the title of the work, and the general time period that it comes from. Okay, so like the late Renaissance, the Northern European Renaissance, the High Renaissance, the Early Renaissance, or the Pre-Renaissance. And I think that might be all we covered unless there's Middle Ages in there. But anyway, look at your review and make sure, and just let me know if you have any questions. So no assignment for this week other than to just study for the test, look at all of this stuff, watch the video, and just kind of get ready for next week. All right. Well, y'all have a great night. Thank you so much.